Welcome back to Pints and Plot Twists with me, Julia. And this is the place where great fiction meets great beer. So the horror genre is absolutely blowing up right now. It's going totally mainstream after taking the back seat for a little while. And personally, I've always been like a pretty big horror junkie, but almost exclusively through movies and TV. I've read the odd horror book here and there, but it's never really been a major thing. I just don't generally find horror books scary. I loved the era of slashers, those early 2000s like Urban Legend, Scream, Final Destination, and the absolute classic, Idle Hands. Oh, so good. And as I said, read the odd horror book, just don't find them that scary until I read Darcy Coates's From Below. That book scared the absolute Jesus out of me. It was terrifying. I actually had to put it down and read Jane Austen before bed because I was so freaked out by this book. Now, drowning and dying underwater is probably my worst fear. So this book is all about deep sea diving, and that probably is where the scare came from, but I legitimately had to put it down because I was scared I would get nightmares. And then after I read that, I went on this massive horror kick. It's all I wanted to read. I was chasing that fear. I was chasing that hit of terror, and I wasn't getting it. I couldn't find another book that really scared me. So I was racing through horror book after horror book after horror. I mean, I must have read 80 horror books last year, and none of them gave me that same terror that From Below did. And then I read The Exorcist, the William Peter Blatty classic, on vacation, and it kind of freaked me out. It got to me a little bit. And I started thinking to myself, maybe instead of chasing that scare, I should just try and enjoy my books. And so that's what I did. And because of that, I found some amazing gems that, while maybe not particularly scary, I really loved. So I think you might like these too, even if you are prone to nightmares and you are kind of wimpy and you have to pull the covers up over your head watching scary movies. So today I want to share a few of my absolute favorite low spook, low gore, some of them no spook, no gore books that kind of fall into that horror genre. So if you are thinking about trying out some of the amazing fiction that's come out recently, here are some good options for you. One of these books I would even recommend to my mother, and she has to read the last chapter of a book before she can go into it because she can't handle any tension at all. She even has to know the standings of a figure skating competition before she'll go back and watch it. But there is a no money back guarantee here. So if you do get nightmares, well, this video was free to watch, so I can't give you your money back anyways. But before we get into the books, I'm going to talk beer. And today I am drinking this Hazy IPA, The Devil Went Down to Geary Hazy IPA from Blood Brothers Brewing. And I've already cracked this can and gotten into it. But it is a very tasty, not too bitter, nice creamy hazy IPA. Not a ton of fruit in this one. It is quite hoppy, but without being bitter. I'm enjoying. First up is this just spectacularly beautiful book called The Hacienda by Isabel Canas. And I've had this on my shelf for a while now. And I kind of put it aside because I had heard that it was a slow burn, more historical fiction leaning horror. And that's not what I was chasing. But oh my God, that was such a mistake. This book I loved. This was 5 million stars for me. I loved it so much. The Hacienda is set in the aftermath of the Mexican War of Independence. So it's 1920s, I believe, Mexico, when they were fighting for independence from Spain. And so it starts out sort of a few years afterwards, and our main character is Beatriz, and her father was a darker skinned, darker haired Mexican, and he fought on the wrong side of the war. So she sort of goes back and tells us a little bit about her history. And her father was actually arrested and executed, which brought shame down on her and her mother. And they had to go and live with her aunt, who basically Cinderella'd her. And so Beatrice, being the pragmatic, clever woman she is, she decides she's got to get married. She's got to find a landowning husband so she can have her own home and she can get out from under the hand of her horrible aunt. And so, being that she is darker skinned, she's not like that, socially desirable kind of woman at the time, and that she's been brought down by her father's arrest, she's kind of stuck with this guy, Don Rodolfo, who has these weird rumors swirling about what happened to his first wife, Catalina, who died under mysterious circumstances. So as we open, Beatrice is arriving at Don Rodolfo's property. He's a landowner and he owns a distillery from the agave fields outside of his hacienda. So she's arriving at her new home with her new husband, and as she gets there, she's realizing, this place is not what she expected. And part of that is because it's quite run down, it's a little bit spooky looking, and then there's this sister that Don Rodolfo has never mentioned, Juana. And Juana takes an immediate disliking to Beatrice, as does their wonderful housekeeper, Ana Luisa. So this hacienda is kind of in disrepair, it's kind of unhappy, and Ana Luisa and her daughter Paloma, who also works at the hacienda, they won't stay there overnight. And Don Rodolfo very quickly goes back to the city to do his business, whatever his reasons were. And so Beatrice is left on this property basically alone because Juana, this horrible sister, stays in one of the outbuildings. And she and Rodolfo do not get along. There's clearly something going on there. And Beatrice very quickly learns that there is something very wrong with this house. It might be haunted. Then enter our second POV. So there is a second POV in this, which is that of Andreas, who is the sort of junior priest at their local church. And he was originally from this area. He grew up at San Isidro, which is the hacienda. And he has now returned, he's become a priest, but he is also a traditional Mexican witch. So he practices this traditional Mexican sort of witchcraft. And Beatrice seeks out help from the church to deal with whatever's going on with this house. And Andreas is the only one that believes her, and so he decides to help her. This book does have some spooky vibes. It is about a haunted house, but very light and very light on the gore. In fact, I would go so far as to say there's no gore. It's very much like historical fiction with a little bit of romance weaved in. And it was just stunningly beautiful. The gothic atmosphere. Oh my God, it's so good in this book. And I loved Beatrice and I loved Andreas. And I even loved some of the side characters were these fully fleshed out people, right? They were morally complex. They had a lot to them. They had their own personalities. Paloma was a fabulous character. Ana Luisa, I still don't understand her, and I kind of love that about her. And I found the historical context of the war and sort of the fallout afterwards really fascinating. It's not a major part of the book. It just kind of is told through to help sort of understand Beatrice's motivations. But I loved it. And now I need to go read every one of Isabel Canas' books because, my gosh, was this ever good. This was so beyond 5 stars for me. One of my favorite books this year. Next up is one of the funniest horror books that is not a horror comedy. It's We Live Here Now by Sarah Pinborough. I had a blast with this book. It's another haunted house story. But man, this one was so much fun. And the ending, so good. So this is about a married couple, Emily and Freddie. And it's told between their 2 POVs. And Emily and Freddie move into this rural house after Emily has this horrible accident. She has a hiking accident and then she gets sepsis and ends up in a coma. And while she's in a coma, Freddie decides to sell their London flat and move them out to the countryside to this house that Emily once sort of jokingly was like, hey, we should buy this house. Wouldn't that be fun? And he just kind of unilaterally goes out and does it. And Emily is kind of feeling weird. She's still recovering. Freddie goes back to work in this town, so he's commuting from this house. And Emily starts finding the house kind of weird. But she goes out, she gets to know the community, she joins a book club. Clever lady. But weird things are happening around this house. Like there's this nail that cuts her, and then she freaks out about getting sepsis again. And the people are kind of odd. Very nice, but kind of odd. And like she keeps finding this dead crow inside of her home. And one of the funnest things about this book is there's actually a few chapters told from the POV of a crow. Not the dead one, but a crow nonetheless. And like they don't really add a lot to the story or the plot, but they were really funny. I mean, crows for birds are very smart, but birds overall, not the cleverest things in the world. And so like it was kind of funny. It was very entertaining. The crow was kind of dumb and I loved it. So a lot of the characters in this book are completely unlikable, like beyond unlikable. Freddie is the absolute worst and I hated him. But oh boy, does that make this book satisfying. I wanted terrible things to happen to these people. And yeah, I got my wish. Yet it's still really light on the spook and it's really light on the gore. And so how she managed to do that was just so much fun. This book was so fast paced. It was so, it's like potato chips, right? You start and you cannot put it down. It was great. Sarah Pinborough really knows how to write like a thrilling, exciting book. And I think this sort of borders on thriller perhaps, but really it is a haunted house story at its core. But it's so much fun. Sarah Pinborough actually wrote Behind Her Eyes, which was turned into a Netflix miniseries. And I absolutely want to read that now that I have read this, but I have to let the miniseries sort of leak out of my brain a little bit. And I will definitely be rereading this because I enjoyed it so much. But I, again, want to let the plot sort of leak out of my brain a little bit first. Shouldn't be too hard, of course. This may not be the best written book in the world. This may not be elegant prose, but man, does it move. And I actually jumped out of my seat and laughed at this book. I had so much fun with it. I would highly recommend it. If those sound like a touch too spooky scary for you, they're not really, but if you want zero spook and zero gore, The Hounding by Xenobe Purvis is a great place to start. This is another one that really leans much more historical fiction, and in fact, I think it's classed as horror, but I would not call this horror. Very much just slightly fantastical historical fiction. This has no spooks, no gore, and you know how I mentioned my mom earlier and how scared she is? I would recommend this one to her, but she is on a big Harlequin romance kick right now, so we're going to wait till she gets back to her historical fiction phase. Then I'm going to recommend this one to her. It's just a little guy, little tiny book, but it really was a lot of fun. So this is just a little book, but it's about these four sisters, the four Mansfield sisters, and they live in 1700s England in this little village, little Nettlebed, and they don't really fit the sort of typical mold of like what's expected from them. Like they're not interested in mixing with the town folk. They're like very much outcasts of this town. And they live with their grandfather. And this story is told through a few rotating POVs, including the grandfather and a bunch of the villagers. And it really tells the tale of these, villagers decide that these girls are turning into dogs. And it sort of starts with like them hearing barking and then moves on to one guy swears he saw one of the girls turn into a hound. Hence The Hounding. But what this book is about, and it's very unsubtle, but it is about, the misogyny of like how these communities start these rumors about women that don't fit in to sort of explain their behavior. They're not behaving in the way society expects, so there's obviously something wrong with them. It's not subtle. It lightly hammers you over the head, but the storytelling was really great. And the characters were interesting. I mean, one of the POVs is this just repugnant, like horrible guy. And yet I found myself really enjoying his chapters nonetheless. Such an interesting peek into the psyche of someone who feels spurned and then turns nasty. So like, you know, that guy on Tinder that you say you're not interested in, and he goes from saying like, oh, you're so beautiful, I'd love to meet up, to like, well, you're a bitch and a terrible person anyways, and I hate you. Very much the embodiment. One of these characters was the embodiment of that. And yet I still really enjoyed reading about him. And so like in this, Xenobe Purvis really explores like how these rumors start and then how they grow into these sort of things with a life of their own, to the point where women are persecuted. Not wholly original, but very enjoyable nonetheless. And like the storytelling was so beautiful and like folksy and like almost a hint of fairy tale-ishness to it, that I really enjoyed it, despite it being kind of unsubtle and not terribly original. My only complaint with this book is that you really don't get to know the Mansfield sisters very well. Like I read it about a year ago, and to be fair, like they've all kind of blended almost into one character together, except maybe the eldest, but I would have loved to get them a little bit more fleshed out. So that was my really only complaint with this book. But this cover, oh my gosh, she's so beautiful. I got this as a cover buy and ended up really enjoying it. And I do like that sort of theme of how women become persecuted, and then how these rumors sort of grow into living things and get bigger than what they really are. Beautiful book. Another one that I would recommend to readers looking to dip their toes into horror and not get totally traumatized is called Cold Moon Over Babylon by Malcolm McDowall. This is a stunningly, stunningly beautiful book. We're going back to the haunting on this one, but it does have some more spookiness to it and a little bit more gore. Still, it's not a gory book, but it does have definitely more oppressiveness, more tension, and more haunting. But this is about, it's a Southern Gothic about this Larkin family. And so it's a grandmother, her grandson, and granddaughter, Jerry and Margaret. And they live on this blueberry farm in the South United States. And one day, Margaret is out riding her bike and she doesn't come home. And so it kind of deals with, you know, Jerry is the brother. He's got to manage the harvest of the blueberries, because if they don't have a good harvest, they're going to lose their farm. And Margaret hasn't come home. Her grandmother's terrified. Margaret's about 15 at the time, something like that, 15, 16, and Jerry is about 20. And then Margaret turns up in the river. She has been murdered and tied to her bike and sunk in the river. And so as, you know, Jerry and his grandmother are dealing with this like horrifying grief and yet still having to push through and manage the harvest, and also figure out what's happened to Margaret, it was so sad and heartbreaking, but it was such a good mystery. And the atmosphere that McDowall creates in this book is so haunting and oppressive, but beautiful nonetheless. And he wrote another one called The Elementals that has that same sort of really oppressive atmosphere. I did find The Elementals a bit scarier. So if you're into like more psychological horror, that one was fabulous also. But this one I would definitely recommend starting with. It's just a quick, snappy read, despite being kind of, more atmospheric, slightly slow burn, because there's this sort of mystery that you're unraveling. And because the POVs rotate quite a bit through, you know, Jerry, his grandmother, some of the townspeople, I think one of the cops, the mayor, there's a lot happening, and it moves very quickly in spite of this tension sort of ratcheting up slowly. It is kind of a slow burn, but then that ending goes 100, like it goes hard. This is another one that gets into like what happens to women that don't follow the societal norms, you know, how men deal with women that just don't fit in and do exactly what they're supposed to do and be the good girls and, you know, marry, be a little wifey, etc. So yeah, it was very fascinating. I loved this book so much, and I would highly recommend it. McDowall was such a wonderful writer. I'm so sad that we've lost him now. It's a slightly older book, so it's a little bit harder to find, but if you can find it, it is 100% worth your time. Another fun one that I just love to recommend, and this one, don't do on audiobook, do it in the physical book, because part of the appeal of this book is the catalog nature of it. This is Horrorstore by Grady Hendrix. And Grady Hendrix has been having a moment lately. He released last year a book called Witchcraft for Wayward Girls, which is probably your 6th or 7th book. And it was a huge hit. I actually haven't read it yet because it was a huge hit. But what Grady Hendrix does so well is he takes these absurd concepts and makes them horror. So this is basically about an IKEA store. It's called Orsk in this. And the book is laid out like a literal IKEA catalog. And man, it's fun. Like, the chapters have all the furniture with the stupid names. You have to read this in physical form. It just is not as impactful or as much fun otherwise. This is about a group of people who work in this IKEA sort of ish store, Orsk. Our main character is Amy. She's kind of like she can't follow through on anything. She has no ambitions in life. She's kind of just going with the flow, working at Orsk. Until one day she is asked by her manager, Basil, to stay behind for the night and to sort of patrol the store, because there's been all these like random little acts of vandalism. Like, they come in and there's like couch cushions thrown around, or there's dirt on one of the couches, or there's poop in one of the beds. And so Basil's determined to get to the bottom of what is happening in the store, who's vandalizing it. So he recruits Amy, and then sort of like one of the matriarchal type people who's worked at Orsk forever, Ruth Ann. And they're going to patrol the store through the night to try and catch whoever's doing it. And they do catch some people, but it's Trinity and Matt, 2 other employees who are there like trying to film a ghost hunt, because they are convinced that this store is haunted. So as they begin to sort of patrol for the evening and to try and figure out what is going on, some really weird paranormal haunted shit starts going down. And this like crazy supernatural plot threatens to take them all out one by one. So Grady Hendrix has this incredible talent for taking the absurd and turning it into horror, and really making it like horrifying, despite it being kind of silly almost. And that lends so much levity to his books. So like, this actually does have some gore, some spooks in it for sure. And yet, because of the kind of light nature of this book, it surprises you. It kind of comes out of nowhere, and you can really deal with it because it is so much fun, frankly. I'll never forget the first book of his that I read was called The Southern Book Club's Guide to Vampire Slaying. And I thought for sure this was like a metaphor. I thought they were like, slaying vampires in their books, or, they were going to use their imagination, pretend to be vampire slayers, something like that. This cute group of little Southern ladies. And when the gory, brutal death kicked in, I was like, what the hell am I reading? It shocked me. This one's not quite as gory. It does have some gore though, so make sure that your stomach is ready before you go into this one. But not quite as brutal as the vampire slaying one, which they actually end up like with real vampires. It shocked the hell out of me, to be honest. But since then, I've read a bunch more of his books, and I've actually really enjoyed all of them. I think Horrorstore might be my favorite just because it is so fun and so silly, and yet still a good ghost story. I highly recommend this to someone who has, a little bit more of a stomach for a touch of scare, but who's looking for a very fun ride. And finally, my last book that I want to recommend today is called The Bewitching by Silvia Moreno-Garcia. She is someone I talk about on this channel a lot because one of her earlier books, Mexican Gothic, is actually one of my all-time favorites. And I would recommend most of her books for sort of beginner horror fans. They're not high gore, They are fairly low gore. They are somewhat low on the spooks, though there's some pretty good scares in them. The Bewitching is her latest, and it is told over 3 timelines, with our sort of main anchor character being Minerva, who is in, I believe, 1990s, and she is a graduate student at a college, and she is studying horror fiction. And in particular, her thesis is actually on Beatrice Tremblay, who is a fictional author who wrote this horror book called The Vanishing, which is based on sort of a real disappearance of a woman who went missing from this college. And Beatrice went to the same college that Minerva is currently studying at. So Minerva is out to find out, the story behind The Vanishing, the story behind Beatrice Tremblay, and why she wrote this book, and what happened to this woman she wrote about. The other sort of main timeline is in the early 1900s, I think 1910, something like that. And it's Minerva's grandmother, Alba, as a young woman, and her telling the story of a time in her youth when she becomes convinced that her family is cursed by a witch. And her brother dies, her father dies, so she has decided, her family's been cursed by this witch, and she's got to figure out how to break this curse, who the witch is, and what's happening. And then finally, the third timeline is in the 1930s, I believe, and it is Beatrice Tremblay, the author herself. And so there are a few chapters from her perspective and sort of outlining what happened in the lead up to her writing this book, The Vanishing. So it's actually her roommate, Victoria, is the one who goes missing, and that is who Beatrice wrote this book about. So the 3 timelines are weaved together to sort of create this very atmospheric, very dark academia, very witchy book. And Moreno-Garcia's writing is so good. Her atmospheres are just incredible. And a lot happens here, but it is kind of a slower burn. As I said, much more on the dark academia side of things than the horror side of things. And there's a cat. But the vibes here in this book are they're so good. I read this in October of last year, and I would highly recommend this as an autumnal book because this is the perfect thing to curl up with under a cozy blanket with a cup of tea as the leaves are changing color and you're reading this sort of back to school feeling, autumnal witchy book. This was the perfect choice for that vibe. It is quite low on the spook scale, quite low on the gore scale, though there are some uncomfortable events. So check your trigger warnings if that is something that you need to do before you go into this book. But low spooks, low gore, and a really nice story overall. Those are the 6 books that I would recommend to those who don't want to be traumatized and get nightmares for a month after reading a horror book. So if you are curious about horror, but you don't want to sleep with the lights on tonight, definitely pick up one of those. I love recommending books to people. I'm so glad that horror is making this amazing comeback. Daniel Kraus, who wrote one of my all-time favorite books, also Whale Fall, he just won the Pulitzer Prize for fiction for a horror book, which is amazing to see. There's so many good horror movies coming out right now. It's really having a big resurgence, and I love to see that, and I love to see some of the quality that's coming through in these things now. And so Angel Down is actually my next read. I'm so excited to get started. In the meantime, I want to thank you so much for sticking around for this video. Please drop me a like if you found these helpful, and let me know what you got started with horror. If you're into horror, what got you into this? Now I'm going to go finish up this damn tasty Hazy IPA. I will see you in the next chapter. Cheers.